Everybody, we are going to be recording this session, so are we recording? We're recording. Great. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Meg Meiman, and I'm the Associate University Librarian for Learning, Research, and Engagement at George Mason University Libraries. I wanted to welcome you all to the first of a two-part series, Open Access Publishing in the Humanities, Mapping the Terrain. And this is co-hosted by our libraries and the Center for Humanities Research. And today's discussion is the first of that two-part series, subtitled Models for the Monograph. And I'm joined by three leading open access publishers in the humanities. Before I introduce them, though, I wanted to say just a short note that the libraries, that we're really happy to have this partnership with the Center for Humanities Research. Because it's given us the opportunity, I think this collaboration has given us the chance to foster a sense of community around topics that we see as highly relevant to the humanities and to libraries. Mm-hmm. And we're equally happy to be talking with you today about this topic because it's bringing us all together to really address, highly relevant issue. And in terms of the people who've actually led this partnership, that includes our library's dean, Ann Osterman, as well as Catherine Oline, the Associate Director of the Center for Humanities Research, and Alok Yadav, the Center for Humanities Research Faculty Director. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to just say a quick word too about today's discussion. So after I introduce the speakers, we'll start with a series of questions that we've written ahead of time for our speakers about open access in the humanities. And then we're going to open it up for a broader Q&A to include everybody here, both online and in the room, to ask questions of our speakers. So without further ado, our first speaker, Eileen Rodenberg-Joy, is a specialist in medieval history studies and contemporary cultural studies, as well as a publisher with a wide variety of publications in several areas, including poetry and poetics, intellectual history, queer studies, and ethical philosophy. She's the founding editor of Post-Medieval, a journal of medieval cultural studies, and she's founding director of Punctum Books, Spontaneous Acts of Scholarly Combustion. Our second speaker, Peter Potter, is Vice President for Open Access Publishing at Paradigm Publishing Services and the Executive Director of the De Gruyter eBound Foundation. A historian by training, he served in senior positions at the university presses of Wesleyan University, Penn State, and Cornell University. In 2017, he launched Virginia Tech Publishing as a digital-first open access publisher based in the university libraries. And then our third speaker, Charles Watkinson, is the Associate University Librarian for Publishing at the University of Michigan Library, and he's director of the University of Michigan Press. Prior to moving to Michigan in 2014, Charles was director of Purdue University Press and the head of scholarly publishing services in Purdue Libraries for 5 years. And he was also an initiator of the Library Publishing Coalition. He's a publisher because he couldn't get a job in archaeology. It's probably the most important fact you need to know about Charles. Welcome to three of our speakers. We're really happy to have you here. And I wanted to kick it off with the first question, which is, why do you think open access is important for humanities scholarship? I think that's a good idea. All right. So yes, as Catherine just said, let's pick a victim. Let me start with Eileen, because you seemed like you laughed the most at that joke.
I will laugh at anything. Invite me to your parties. All kidding aside, this is a great question, actually, because of all the disciplines in the academy, the humanities have been slowest to embrace open access. Scientists led the way. And in some ways, the argument there is just easy, because if scientific literature is readily available across the world, it increases the progress of scientific achievement. So it's like boom, boom, And because scientists were able to hitch the highest prestige journals in their fields to open access, they never had to sit around wringing their hands worrying about the prestige problem, right? Whereas humanities scholars have a very different ball game that they're playing within the institution. But more importantly than all of that, it's important simply because of impact. And it's important because more and more, I've decided that open access publishing is about education, and we don't use that word enough. It's about broadening the ambit of the knowledge of the university to areas where that knowledge might not go or be available or accessible. And and since we're kind of at a moment in time when it's getting harder to access the university as an institution, um, and the assault on universities that's happening right now, we in the humanities need to embrace open access because it simply widens the ambit of our students. You know, if education is truly public, it's supposed to be for everyone. And I think humanities scholars should think to themselves, am I writing for my peers or am I writing for the historical record that is open? Um, and that to me is the question that humanities scholars need to ask themselves.
Thank you.
I-
Charles?
I,
Or
uh,
not anyone? Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. That's a perfect. Eileen's really expressed it very, very well. I want to add a couple of things. So a couple of years ago, there was a very good article in a journal called Research Information, where it was called A Crucial Time for OA Monographs. And it was written by Martin Eve, who's the author of Open Access in the Humanities, an important Pynchon scholar. And by Anthony Cons, who's the director of Liverpool University Press. And they ended by saying, without investment in open access monographs, without author engagement, we will reach a bad place. We will reach a world where all scientific work is free to read by the public, but all humanities work is prohibitively expensive. We must avoid this elitist world at all costs. So that's a very sort of tactical place to sort of start with the realization that over 50% of the academic journal article literature is now immediately open access on publication. And that means that we are at danger of being drowned in one form of literature and completely missing out on the other in society. And then the other thing is, there is, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? I think there's a very, very strong focus on life and liberty, but the idea of the pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of curiosity, the development of readers and humans as a whole, with an appreciation of things beyond just finding information, but actually enjoying the world. We do miss that in in sort of articles about constitution, the origins of democracy, and that pursuit of happiness thing. I think one gets an awful lot from humanities literature that actually allows people to be whole humans. So I think that's important for everybody.
That's really wonderful. Thank you. I was just thinking to myself, impact and access and education, like you were saying, Eileen, and then, but the really, I guess, powerful affective nature of this as well, which is, or even more specifically, as you just put it, the pursuit of happiness. Oh, and thank you for putting the article in the chat. I think that's really wonderful. I appreciate that. Peter, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this too, as well.
Yeah, I think Charles and Eileen have said it very well. The only thing I would guess I would just add is the question, it's interesting. Sometimes I think we pin ourselves into a corner when we're talking about open access because of it's a term, and it's a sort of a new term that that people are trying to figure out exactly what it means, how to define it. But if you were to just frame the question as, why do you think access is important for humanities scholarship? You'd say, well, of course. I mean, humanities scholarship should be available as widely as possible. And it sort of answers itself there. And I think open access is simply the next step in that we need to, as Charles said, it's very important that we not get humanities scholarship cornered away from the rest of the scholarly record, the scientific record. It should be part of and particularly in the digital world where everything's defined is assigned identifiers, and you can find things easily by searching. If humanities scholarship isn't in that same trough of information, then we're furthermore isolating ourselves in the scholarly community.
Thank you. Well, actually, to follow up on that, that's a really good segue into my next question, which I wanted to first pose to you, Peter. You know, in saying what you were just saying now about the importance of having open access or humanities scholarship being open access because it leads to its discoverability, and then to all the other things that all of you just mentioned. What experiences or examples, if any, has your press, starting with you, Peter, had in bringing scholars' works into dialogue with the wider world, especially scholars in under-resourced institutions?
Sure. Well, over my career, I've had a number of opportunities to sort of experiment with that. I oversaw the Tome Initiative for it was a 5-year pilot project that brought open access monographs, or brought monographs that were published by top university presses, made them open access, and I was at Virginia Tech at the time, and our institution participated in that. So I worked with the faculty at our university to kind of persuade them to publish their books in the Tome Initiative, and it was really rewarding to see how over the course of that sort of the 5 years of doing that initiative, at the beginning, I found that I had to persuade faculty to publish. They had to be convinced that this was a good thing. By the end of the project, after we'd funded 15 books, the people were coming to me, the faculty were coming to me saying, I want to publish my book open access. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that as scholars once you've sort of started publishing open access, and you see that it's if you had doubts or skepticism about it, once you do it and you see the benefits, you see how your work is read, you see how it's cited, you see how you get invitations to speak at events that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. I had one faculty member at Virginia Tech who was an anthropologist who worked in Guatemala, in rural Guatemala, and he published his monograph with Cornell Press, and the book was open access. And if it had been published just as a print edition and available at $45, nobody in Guatemala would have ever had access to it. As a free open access monograph, it was available to anyone. Anyone who could read English, but it was available. And then he was getting invitations to speak at institutions that he said, he probably wouldn't have gotten before, because people could, when they were researching him, they could find his book, they could read some of it and see what he was doing. So it was a real revelation to him, and he's become a big advocate of open access since then. So that's one example.
That's really wonderful. Thank you. The comment that you made earlier about when faculty members first approach you and you convince them, and then you essentially like make them true believers. I want to hold on to that point because that's going to lead us into the next question really well. But in the meantime, Eileen, I was wondering if you could provide, if you have specific experiences or examples that you've encountered in terms of, yeah.
This is the only question I prepared. I mean, I wanted to be loose here, but I did prepare this answer. I didn't rehearse it, but I have two examples. One is institutional and one is outstitutional, a phrase coined by Paul Boshears, who's one of my authors. One is related to Virginia, the first one. So Viva and Punctum have a relationship with each other in terms of funding for open access books. Earlier this year, I wanted to take a peek at usage data just within the system of Virginia of our texts. And when I asked my co-director, Vincent, to generate that data for me, I said, and I'm embarrassed to say this out loud, but let me tell the truth. I said, don't worry about the community colleges, just get me the four-year schools and the PhD schools and the whatevers and the whatevers. And Vincent said, no, Eileen, it would be a lot easier for me if you just let me give you all the data. So he did. I started looking at it. I was like, oh my God. Community college patrons in Virginia are visiting our texts as often as patrons at George Mason University, the University of Virginia, University of Richmond, Virginia Commonwealth University, Virginia Tech. I mention those schools specifically because they help fund Punctum Books. And the affordance of that funding is access to literature for community college students and faculty who otherwise might not have the same access to those resources. And I think within the institution, we have to think about that. So that's impressive. But institutionally, at Punctum, the way this has been visible to us, meaning what is the impact of our books beyond the confines of the university or the academic setting or whatever. And I'm not even necessarily thinking about privileged versus under-resourced here, right? We publish a lot of books that involve authors who are not academics. So we recently published a book called Crossings, Migrant Forms, Migrant Knowledges. And earlier in the year, we published a book called Nairobi Becoming. Both of these books involved scholars from institutions like Oxford, Cambridge, etc. But they also had authors who were artists, cooks, migrant project directors of various sorts, museum curators, et cetera, et cetera. And the way open access impacts that is these authors come from communities that are not plugged into the university. They're not doing things with the university. They're not funded by the university. But the open access nature of the text means that people in their community access that knowledge, access their voices, and become part of a hybrid academic, non-academic community that's working together on, an intellectual project. So obviously, I wish I had a story of we published a book and it went to this amazing place and it changed the life of these 10 people. I don't have a great story like that. But I also know that because our books are open, and it isn't just because they're open, everybody in this room knows that making something open doesn't mean people access it or even know it exists. The publisher has to spend a lot of time working on distribution channels, discovery, all of that stuff so that the books are really getting out there and they're really visible. At that point, I think we can say to ourselves, we know the books are affecting people who otherwise wouldn't have access. They just are. One of my authors, I can't believe I forgot this. I did an interview with her earlier this week for Open Access Week. And she told us in the interview that a woman wrote her and had a tattoo on her arm of a line from her book, which was about maternity and the limits of academic discourse. So, and then she shared the book with someone else and they formed a group around the book. So I guess, how many academics can tell you someone tattooed their arm with a line from someone's book? Maybe if all the books were open, there'd be more tattoos of academics' works. But, that's just a small story. But honestly, within the institutions who support open access create an affordance for institutions who can't and their students. And books that are open go places they wouldn't normally go. And anthropology, especially as a field, has understood this almost better than anyone else in the social sciences and humanities because they study people in various parts of the world, and those people almost never get to read the work that is about them. Right? So that's another way open access is meaningful and should be meaningful as well in the humanities. Whatever it is you're studying, are the groups involved with that, or the subjects involved with that, able to partake in this work, or are they just the dead other of your work? So those are my thoughts on that.
Thank you. So many great lines. I think more tattoos is definitely one of them. But I mean, that's a really brilliant, I think, example of real world impact. Charles, I was wondering if you had any experiences or examples that you've encountered, I think.
Yeah, I just put in the chat a little bit of a snapshot from our free ebook survey, looking at segments of users. And I think a really interesting segment that we had not expected to see reacting to the advantages of open access, what we called, I like the term what is it, Eileen, outstational?
Institutional?
Outstitutional. I really like that, because this category of independent, resource-starved, and loosely affiliated scholars really jumps out in our ebook survey, and I think this strongly connects to that Association of University but Professors survey back in 2023 that showed that 68% of US faculty are now precarious, loosely affiliated, and 50% of them are part-time. So I think we underestimate as publishers quite often, and not all publishers, and I know this is something Eileen's talked about quite a bit, but we underestimate as publishers the degree to which the tenure system has broken down in the US. So when we talk about scholars in institutions that are marginalized, often it springs to mind, other countries, but it is such an issue in the US. And beyond the issue of affiliation and lack of affiliation around licensing for ebooks and availability for print books, there is also the issue of access to being an author. And I think, well, I'm sure we'll come to this, but one of the issues with open access books, I know we're focused on books here, and books are not the only output of the humanities, but one of the big issues, of course, is that any model to making them open access that requires the author to pay immediately marginalizes and makes it impossible for many authors to actually access the systems. We work with this initiative, Lever Press, and I noticed that Luke, who's the head of Lever Press, is on the list of participants. It was set up as a diamond open access press where no author had to pay for anything by liberal arts colleges with exactly that in mind. And it's very striking that there are more authors than we ever expected who can't get the money together for a book publishing charge. So it's another form of potential access bias that we need to always keep in mind with open access publishing. We don't want to switch restriction in readership for restriction in authorship. And I know, again, Eileen's talked a lot about this.
Right. Thank you. Peter, I think you had raised your hand. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in there and just say that what I've experienced with faculty is, in picking up on Charles's point, that there's a lot of discouragement, I think, among faculty about in the humanities when they see sort of they publish a book and it sells 150, 200 copies, and they're submitting their tenure portfolio, and there's often this, what is the impact of your work? And there's a sense of, or I had sensed among authors, an increasing sort of discouragement around sort of how do you show your impact. And with open access, I just seen authors, faculty members just become much more positive about the work they're doing, because they've got evidence that people are reading it, and they can increasingly in tenure portfolios, you can put in information about, even if it's qualitative information about usage and impact stories. It really can make a difference, and it helps them to see that their work does matter. And I think we've gotten to the point in the humanities where we don't value as much the work that they are doing, and the importance of that to the larger, information, culture that we're all part of. So just.
Thank you for that. You actually helped me kind of get teed up for the next question. But I think one of the things that you just mentioned reminded me when I was finishing up my dissertation. So not really, well, it was book length, felt like a book. It was not really written as a book. But when I was finishing it up, I remember having a couple of very friendly debates with people at my institution, not my dissertation committee, thankfully, to make my dissertation open, to put it in the university's institutional repository. And they were saying, well, if you want to turn this into a print book later on, you really shouldn't. And I had to do quite a bit of convincing, and it helped that I'd been a librarian for a long time. And I could say, well, I'm going to put it in the Internet Archive. And I did. And I can actually see like, oh, it's gotten 50 downloads, which, to me just made me ecstatic. So I guess what I'm trying to do is, in getting to this next question, is then how do you deal with questions, maybe from faculty members or others, questions that kind of center on that kind of skepticism, like questions about prestige or scholarly rigor and legitimacy. I mean, what you're saying, Peter, like I wholly tend to agree with everything all of you have said thus far. But if you're working with somebody who's really skeptical or is putting together their tenure file and they are encouraged not to make their works open, how do you deal with those kinds of questions, but especially like prestige and rigor? And actually, Charles, I'd like to start with you first, if you don't mind. And if you want to pass, you can.
No, I always like hearing the sound of my own voice. No, prestige, rigor. I mean, of course, there's nothing about open access that should make any difference there from the point of view of the publishers who are committed to a process that actually certifies, registers a book, as we all are on this call. But the perception is 100% out there, and we still encounter it. And we do publish 75% of the University of Michigan Press books open access immediately, thanks to organizations like Viva, in fact. But there is a 25% that we don't. And it really is quite often the case in that 25% that somebody will say, I have one of these very preciously rare tenure opportunities. My committee is saying that open access is might be perceived as lower quality. I'd love to do open access. I can't afford to risk this unique opportunity for promotion. It's really much more common than we had expected, and it tends to come from the traditionally prestige universities as well, like Harvard, etc. Really sad. One of the things that has worked in that case has been some of the new models for embargoed open access. So there's this one from JSTOR called Path to Open, which allows a book to be initially published restricted access, and then after 3 years, it's guaranteed to go open access. But it's sad that we're still wrestling with it. It's real, and I hope it's transitional.
Thank you. Eileen, did you have thoughts about dealing with questions of prestige and rigor?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts about this. I'm going to keep this, but I have to give you I think one thing you've done is you've assembled 3 people who in different ways have been doing this for a while. I think I'm the youngest in terms of my years in publishing compared to Peter and Charles, but I've been in it about 15 years, and I was a professor and grad student for 20 years before that. So I feel like I've seen it all, from the beginning of live journal and blogging to debates in the digital humanities, which was cited in the comments, fast forward to now. And I can't believe how rapidly change has occurred in digital publishing and open access publishing, while other things remain incredibly entrenched, right? So I have vowed to myself that I will never again say to, a humanities scholar, you should publish open access to have more impact. Now, you might think, why is Eileen saying that? Because it is, in fact, one of the best ways to convince a humanities scholar to publish open access is to say, quite simply, you will have more readers, period. You will have more evidence to demonstrate that readership, okay? I never wanted to write a monograph, and I never did. But I was one of the most successful people in my field before I retired from it. I'm not kidding, right? And how did I accomplish that? Blogging and open access publication. I just published anywhere, whether it was prestigious or not. And all of a sudden, I was getting so many invitations to speak around the world. I was on a plane every 2 weeks, and it almost killed me. So is that a success story? It depends. Because increasingly I'm asking myself, and this follows from Charles's comments, why do we want academia to be the Hunger Games? Why are we asking what the impact of a book is when we should be asking, what is its value? What is its worth? How does it relate to the world around it? And how does that relationality become visible and meaningful? These are things that can't really be measured. The things that can't be measured are in many ways the things that matter, but we're stuck in a neoliberal, techno-managerial, overly bureaucratic, competitively agonistic institution of higher ed, which leads faculty to have to care about things like prestige, reputation, status, privilege, etc. At the exact moment, as Charles pointed out, 65% of all teaching lines are adjunctified. Some people say it's higher. It's not the same at every institution, obviously, it's uneven, but I'm really trying to think about this. I want to get humanities scholars to see that the worth of open access is not that it allows them to tick boxes off on a tenure and promotion review, but that their work has a better chance of actually affecting people beyond the confines of their particular field and even in other fields. I mean, the other thing about open access, people talk about interdisciplinarity all the time. They don't even know what it means half the time. And actually, it's not fully achievable because there isn't enough time in the world to be a biologist and a anthropologist, although I'm sure that field, exists. But the thing is, you also affect people in other fields. The biggest insight I got starting in 2010 or so through Punctum, but also through my other activities within my field as a proponent of opening up all sorts of things, is that all of a sudden people in other disciplines also know what you're doing because your work is open. So I guess I would say to humanities scholars, and I already said it, so I'll say it again, really think about what it is you want. If what you want is a kind of competition where you will outshine others in your field and get applauded and get awards and get tenure, go for it. The world is ready-made for you. But maybe what's more important is that you have a real audience. It's that simple. I mean, I'm a writer. I also have an MFA. And, as writers, we just want someone to read us, And in closed access publishing, guess what? Nobody is, except people in your field, maybe a few others. And yes, some academic books break the borderline, get reviewed in the New Yorker, end up on NPR, the LA Review of Books, whatever, and they can be successful in that way. But in general, it's just, I don't have anything else coherent to say, except to share with you that I feel so torn on this question. And, on the subject of peer review, I've just said flat out, I'm never again telling anyone that open access is peer reviewed. Anyone who thinks it isn't is like stuck in the 1990s and needs to get a clue. Why would scholars and people like me or people who run established university presses do open access books and not peer review them? Sometimes I just want to say to academics, are you stupid? I mean, you're insulting me right now. Okay, end of rant.
I'm so glad we're recording this. So really, I mean that sincerely. Thank you for that. I think the range of your answer, I think, really kind of reveals a lot of the, I think, profound and entrenched kind of like contradictions or the thorniness of that question. And Peter, I actually did want to turn to you and have you a chance to weigh in on that question. Did you have any thoughts?
Sure. The only thing I wanted to add was that one of the things in sort of very practical terms, I mentioned that at Virginia Tech when I started the recruiting authors to publish open access, I had to convince them, and towards the end I didn't. One of the things we did at Virginia Tech that I can't really take credit for it, it was part of the way the system worked there, was that we had a subvention program established there at the university where that was a shared funding system. So in order for a book to get funding for, to get a subvention, it had the library, the provost's office and the dean's office had to kick in a third of each to kick in a third of the funding. And so we tapped into that with Tome and said that the provost's office and the dean's office had to kick in funding. And what that did was I was able to then say to the faculty member when they're worried about whether they're going to get tenure or not, let's say, well, your dean and the provost are supporting this initiative. So that was a way to immediately assuage any concerns. And one of the things we saw with Tome was that of the number of books that were published, we published about 200 books in that initiative, and probably around half of them were by assistant professors. I know of no instance where an assistant professor did not get tenure because of the book being open access. So I think it's in some cases it's something that is a bit of a red herring, and the more that we sort of see more work being published open access, I think the kind of the dinosaurs who didn't want open access are going off and not being as vocal anymore.
Absolutely. Eileen, go ahead.
Just wanted to add quickly that I remember 10 years ago, so many cases of faculty losing their positions because they were pursuing digital humanities scholarship, never mind open access. I mean, when I think about it, I'm just like, wow, and how far we've come. Now digital humanities is like so chic. It needs to be taken down. So I say that because Punctum Books specializes in what are called critical digital humanities studies. We've even won awards in that area. And those books are heavily critical of, the neoliberal digital humanities. And I'm like, in the span of barely 10 years, we've gone from there to here, right? I also just wanted to say that someone in the comments mentioned that you would like to think that faculty would eventually change the rules of tenure and procedure. And it is happening. When I was at Southern Illinois University for 10 years, I volunteered to chair a committee that the dean established to revisit tenure and promotion policies and revise them. And he promised us that whatever we came up with, he would adhere to it, which was so shocking and unusual. So we spent 2 years on that. Now, open access, we weren't even talking about it then. This was like 2008, but we were talking about DH because everybody in the department was poo-pooing the work of our 2 DH experts who were geniuses, because where's their book? Where's the book? Where's the book? So we revised our policies to give credit for DH work and to treat it as a special type of work that has multiple iterations, is maintained over a long period of time, blah, 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 blah. So we did that. The dean signed off on it. It became policy at that one university. So I do think faculty can eventually make some of this happen so that humanities faculty, as Peter was saying, would even be encouraged to do this with the backing of, administration. But they have to want to do this. The biggest disappointment of my own career in medieval studies was how often I encountered very young members of the field at prestigious institutions like Harvard, NYU, Toronto, et cetera, who were so invested in the prestige system, like they're head first into, they don't want it to go away because they're counting on it to give them cultural capital. So.
Absolutely. Okay. I think I have time for one more question, I think. Okay. One, I guess, final question, I think, from me that I really wanted to ask all of you before we open it up to everybody for Q&A and comments is something, I guess, maybe like the more positive flip side of that other question, which is where would humanities scholars begin, or where should they begin now if they're interested in publishing their scholarship as open access? What might be a good starting point or set of starting points? And I'd like to start with Peter, actually, because I think you mentioned, some potential starting points.
Yeah. So, first of all, I would say probably talk to faculty member in your department. I'm sure at this point there are people who have experience. Even I see that more and more the case that there's just more faculty in humanities departments that have experience publishing open access. So getting that personal endorsement from someone in your own department is very helpful. The sort of the best place I think to go to in terms of like looking for the publishers working in this area is the Directory of Open Access Books, DOAB, that lists all the publishers that publish open access works, and it's connected as well with the OAPEN library, and that's sort of a counterpart to the Directory of Open Access Journals, and it's a good place to look to find if you're kind of curious about finding publishers that do publish open access. But realistically, I think when I think about if I'm a faculty member, an assistant professor in the history department at a university, I would go, first of all, to faculty members in my department, colleagues that I work with, and then to the presses. If in most cases, the presses that that you would want to publish with anyway have some opportunities to publish open access. So if you're going to the University of Michigan Press, they're going to publish a lot of open access. So you can ask the editors that you work with. And that's where I think, one of the great things about open access in recent years is how integrated it has become into the regular publishing ecosphere. So it's not something where you're going to go to a press that you would like to publish with and find out that they don't publish open access. In most cases, the presses that you would want to publish with anyway have an open access option. So that was just a couple of thoughts.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Charles, thank you so much for putting those resources in the chat. I appreciate it. And I was wondering if you'd like to weigh in on that question as well about where you would like to see scholars start.
Well, I actually think that thinking about the why for my particular project, there might be an advantage in publishing open access is quite sensible, because I mean, starting from a position of this is ethically the right thing to do, and a general feeling that it might get more impact is good. But there are specific opportunities that the publisher will then have to around how to pitch the book, how to deliver it through appropriate channels. So if you're an anthropologist and you want to be sure that the people who have been your colleagues in the field also are able to access the work that you may have written about the cultural context in which you are working, that is a particular, very targeted reason. And being able to talk in those terms also really does resonate with publishers and acquiring editors of various sorts, because they're interested in working out how to package your work so that it can actually reach the ideal target audience. And open access for me is pragmatically part of the packaging toolkit that an editor can actually use. So that's kind of just a pragmatic way of thinking about it, and really coming at this with those selfish intentions, which in this more constrained environment, one has to be selfish, I think, as a scholar, unless one's an extraordinary person. And I know there are extraordinary people, but I mean, being selfish is not necessarily bad if you're struggling to get your career advanced, but open access is an advantage in particular cases. Just one other thing I wanted to say, and this ties in there and ties back a little bit, which is I'm a creature of the institution, and I live within a legacy press with an institutional context. One thing that I see absolutely happening at the moment, and this comes back to something Eileen mentioned, is our president just gave a talk to the leadership of the university last week where he said, I want you all to be public intellectuals. I want you all to be public intellectuals. You need to tell the story of why higher education is important to everybody, not just to yourselves. And it's like, open access. And then it's like, we want the university to hit innovative boundaries through interdisciplinarity. Open access, right? We want to exercise freedom of speech and encourage dialogue across difference. Interesting, open access. So it's like everything's moving the direction of open access at the institutional level. What's a little bit of a shame is that connection is not being made. So it would be nice to see authors really sort of articulating what they're doing in terms of, again, how can I get recognition of my own institution by tying in to the presidential, provostial priorities, which are all hugely aligned with open access at this point.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Eileen, did you have any thoughts?
I have nothing but boundless optimism around this prompt. The reason is, it's what I would say to a humanities scholar right now who's curious about open access publishing, interested in it. You know, we can take care of all the assurances of whether it's peer reviewed and all of that. It's just that there's so much now. So when I started Punctum Books in 2011, and I looked around, like, who else is like doing this? It was an incredibly narrow field. In the world of scholar-led, independent, but also library-based academic publishing, scholars running their own presses that aren't supported by their university, but they themselves are supported by the university. The proliferation of these presses, which include Lever Press, okay, as a library-based, you know, attached to a university press, but still kind of independent, like an imprint, I guess. There's so many of them now. And so many of them have established their reputation now. So, you know, if you want to publish open access, it doesn't mean you have to throw your manuscript into a void of who are these publishers again and what are they doing? Because that list now includes MIT, Cambridge, Oxford, Michigan, you know, almost every university press. Well, I have to not say that because actually in the US, I'm concerned sometimes about the lack of university presses wanting to even experiment with open access. So we have to admit that like Michigan and MIT are the exceptions. I'm not trying to put a little ray of sunshine on Charles, but it's true. I mean, and I feel like I've been remiss in saying this in the past. I mean, Charles has been kind of visionary as a university press director relative to open access. So has Amy Brand. Okay, period, full stop. That's a fact. But what about everybody else? Some of them will, Duke is starting to come to the table. Johns Hopkins is talking about coming to the table. So I think over time, authors are going to have a lot of choices. Now, one person in the chat said, but what if I want to publish a book with the press and they offer open access, but it's not for all the books, so I have to kind of pitch myself? Yeah, it's definitely unfortunate when it's like that. There are some economic reasons behind that, though, that are somewhat intractable. Like if Michigan or MIT decided everything would be open access every day, would they be able to fund that? Maybe not. You know, that's why we need programs like Path to Open, where books are funded to be open access, but it might take a little bit longer. But what I'm really trying to say is there's so many choices now of presses in the open access landscape, independent, university-based, library-based, run by scholars, etc., that have been producing so many books for so many years. And these presses are now themselves starting to get somewhat prestigious, right? So if prestige is the problem, never fear, we have quite a few open access presses now that have gained prestige or a reputation, if you want to call it that. I hate the term prestige. In Latin, it means to trick somebody. Which is why the movie The Prestige is called The Prestige. If you've seen that movie, it's fantastic. It's about magicians. So I much prefer reputation. You can have a bad reputation or a good reputation, but at least have one. Well, now many open access presses have stellar reputations, and university presses who already have all of that prestige shored up are also delving into open access. So I think it's going to get better and better. I think if there are legitimate anxieties around having a press come out, a book come out with the right press, I don't want to poo-poo that. I was an academic. I know what it's like. I bucked the system, but I've always been reckless. It's really true. I mean, I'm just sharing that with you. I always do things recklessly and say, hey, let's see what happens. Let's break this and see what happens. That's just me. I don't encourage other faculty people to act like me. But I will say,
call it experiential learner.
Yeah, experience. Thank you. But what I will say is thanks to the work of everyone in this room and so many other people, The world of open access publishing is more open, more welcoming, and safer for humanities scholars who have anxieties over publishing open access. The bottom line is you really want both if you admit it to yourself. You want some status among your peers. You want some respect. There's nothing wrong with that. You do great work. You want it to be acknowledged, but you also want an audience. You're a writer. You have a voice. You want an audience. Open access will always bring you a bigger audience, and you'll still get the other guys. You will, because it's always the work that matters. I was an academic. If your ideas suck and they're published with Harvard University Press, no one's listening to you anyway. Do you know how many books are published by university and other well-known presses that have no impact at all? Do you know what I mean? It's only a small sliver. Yeah. So you know what I'm saying? So I think academics, humanists need to really look at themselves and say, what's the aim here?
Right.
You can have both with open access publishing now. You can have an MIT book. You got that little star on your shoulder, and you also have a bigger audience. Win-win.
I'm really feeling the optimism. Thank you so much for that answer, for all of your answers thus far. And Charles, once again, thank you for putting in the chat our university's strategic priorities. It's always good to be reminded of that. Peter, sorry, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just appreciate everything Eileen said. I just want to push back a bit on the fact that I think I would say most university presses now are experimenting at least with open access, and there are a lot more. I mean, when we did the Tome Initiative, we had 30 presses publish open access books, most of which were American presses. And one of the things I've been trying to do with a program that that I work with at DeGruyter Brill is the University Press Library Initiative, and my mission and what I'm doing is to enable our presses. We have over 50 university presses to enable them to publish open access, and most of the presses are learning to do that. So I think that landscape has changed dramatically over the last few years, and in most cases, I would say the number of presses that categorically don't publish open access books you can count on one hand.
Okay, that's really helpful to know. Thanks. And then I guess Eileen, and then I want to open it up for questions.
Yeah, this will be quick. I don't want to take up that discussion time. I just wanted to say to Peter that I do get that. I mean, I realize too, with Path to Open, in addition to Tome, you see a lot of university presses participating in pilot projects or setting aside a few number of titles. I think what I was mainly trying to lean on is that it's only a few presses that have taken open access to the level of this is a major program within our press, and we're purposefully pushing towards 100% open access, but we have to do it incrementally. Now, Charles can correct me because he's one of those press directors who's doing this, but so that's what I mean about the American situation. It's not that they're not all experimenting with it in some fashion, but for me, it's more a question of how does open access fit in the strategic vision of the press?
That's a really good point. Thank you for qualifying that, Eileen. I really appreciate that. I'd actually like to open it up for questions now, both for folks online and as well as here in the room. And I think, Alok, you actually had a question first. So we're going to zoom the camera back a little bit, and I'm going to continue to monitor chat. But go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. This has been a really informative and even inspiring discussion in lots of ways. I have a whole bunch of questions, but maybe I'll just pick one. And I think it was Eileen mentioned the business of the work that needs to happen after publication to actually get books, noticed by people and accessible in that kind of sense. And I guess I'm just wondering if each of you could say a little bit more about that part of the scene in relation to open access publication and how that might differ from the marketing that needs to happen for any book publication. And a really specific kind of question that's in my mind and just out of my own ignorance, But it seems imaginable that as soon as a book is published in open access format through, I don't know, OCLC or something like that, it would appear in all of the library catalogs of university libraries and, would populate that way, and also public libraries, that it should just kind of become available in that kind of way. And I'm just wondering whether there are any kind of mechanisms like that that help facilitate that subsequent dissemination of open access published monographs.
So who would you like to start? Oh, go ahead.
I'm happy to
Yes.
step in a little bit and say, you would think that that once the book is out there in open access, it's immediately discoverable every place. But it turns out it's a lot more complicated than that. And it's one of the things, again, with the Tome Initiative, that at the end, our advisory board, many of the librarians in the library board were saying, why aren't these books? Why can't we find these books? And in the library, if you're searching in a library catalog, the book may or may not come up as an open access book. And that is the biggest sort of the next frontier. And Charles is more, I think, on top of this probably than I am, but really is this issue of discoverability and integration into the library information discovery layers. It's really complicated, and it's a slow process. I mean, we launched this initiative called UPL Open that is it's an online catalog of over 10,000 books, and we had to get it listed in OCLC, ProQuest, all of the different knowledge bases as a collection. But then once it's available as a collection, it has to be discoverable, or the library has to activate that collection in their discovery layer. And that takes somebody making that decision to do it. And then how does it actually integrate into the discovery layer? So it's actually a lot more complicated than you would think. And there's no question that usage, once a book is available and it proliferates on the web, it becomes the usage, you can see the numbers go up, but we're far from being efficient in terms of how we manage that, and certainly in terms of even tracking the usage. Charles, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that as well.
I see Maria's hand, and that it would be interesting to hear from her.
Give people a chance to respond. If Maria's point is maybe in response to this question?
Yeah, Maria.
Otherwise...
Yeah, did you want to vocalize your question, Maria?
It's not actually in response to this. I did have a very similar question to Alok, so I'm glad that he asked it. I do have some other questions though, so you can pick up with me after the rest of the panelists respond.
Absolutely,
thanks. Thanks for that. I will say public libraries, that was a particularly interesting part of the question. I never expected to become so obsessed with identifiers and types of various sorts, but boy, is it a complicated system. I think a really, really essential thing that open access publishers are realizing ahead of other book publishers is the importance of identifiers. So identifiers like the ORCID for identifying authors, the RAW for identifying institutional affiliation, if it's there. One of the major things that the community of which Eileen is a core part, looking at radical open access and also the COPIM project, has realized is that metadata is absolutely key, and the TOTE initiative that they have pulled together is one of the most effective ways of delivering metadata into the system. But public libraries have an added overlay. In Michigan, there are 17 different consortia operating behind the systems of public libraries. And almost all of them are geared to the delivery of books from the Overdrive company, Overdrive. So there is actually no efficient way of delivering open access books into public libraries. And that's such a missed opportunity. It's one that's being engaged with by the Palace Project, which is led by the largest consortium in the US, Lyrasis, But then it's a matter of completely changing the culture of thinly staffed public library systems. So it's unbelievably difficult. And I totally agree. It's a huge, huge opportunity, and an opportunity we have absolutely got to crack. But the systems in the way are very, very intimidating.
I would just say here, infrastructure. So when I started Punctum, I didn't know anything about publishing. I didn't know anything about what went on inside of libraries. And I was a bit of a naive person who thought if you build it, they will come. If it's on the web, everybody in the blogging world, which, self-immolated in the late aughts, realized that just because they put their words online didn't mean they had an audience. You have to build one. You have to know where you're going. So Punctum has been involved for 5 years now in 2 pretty major projects, COPEAM and Open Book Futures, community-led open publishing infrastructures for monographs. I hate it, but it is what it is. But what we came to realize was, if we want humanists or anyone really to publish open access, we have a debt we need to pay, and that is we need to build the infrastructure that really gets the books a wide exposure. And that means simple things like, are the books in JSTOR? Are they in Project Muse? Are they in EBSCO Knowledge Base? Are they in the Internet Archive? Are they in Google Books? Where's your primary repository? There's all sorts of things, metadata, preservation. Have I guaranteed that your book will have a long life because it has preservation protocols that have been built around it? Is it really swimming through all the channels that are available so that it will run into readers? That's what we have to do as publishers. We have to build that infrastructure. And for open access books, it didn't really quite exist, except piecemeal, right? For 20 plus years, people have been building pieces of infrastructure that support open publishing, but now we're kind of on the cusp of much more global, integrated systems for giving open access books broad exposure and discovery. And that's really important. It's extremely important part of what we do. I've always thought it's kind of unsexy. When infrastructure studies, and I think it's interesting that at the moment this is happening, infrastructure studies as an academic field is very hot right now in the social sciences. So it's an interesting moment where everybody is thinking about, what sustains our operations? How are we able to do what we do? What are the pieces that we need? What is the software that we need? What channels do we need? And a lot of people, including everyone in this talk, is working on that. It's not the most exciting stuff to talk about sometimes, but it's so important.
Yes, especially given, Charles, again, thank you for the diagram that you just put in the chat. That's daunting. Maria, you've been very patient. Would you, what are some of the questions that you had, Maria?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this panel. I've really enjoyed it. And it's been incredibly informative to hear from the publisher's perspective. But I wanted to know, first of all, what are some of the developments that might lead to lowering the costs, the sometimes very prohibitive costs of publishing open access, either for the author themselves or, for their institutions? If you get some, you mentioned a case where, the institution kicked in some of the funds for this. So I'm interested in what developments might be on the horizon that would lower that cost. And then the second question, kind of related set of questions, is what is the incentive? Because you mentioned some publishers do this, some do it only in to a limited extent, some won't do it at all. What are the kinds of incentives that lead publishers to decide to do something like this? And secondly, what are from a more sort of individual level, if you are in the case of being an author and you want to your book published open access and you need to make an argument for that to the publisher, what are the kinds of things that would be most persuasive to the publisher for taking the risk of publishing this open access?
I could start with some of that. I think let's see, the incentives first. So one of the major, and this gets into a little bit of kind of the politics of weirdness as the sort of deep infrastructure type debates amongst people like us on the panel. But incentive-wise, usage stats are very, very helpful. And we're having the other part of that diagram, the second page of that diagram, is how hard it is to flow those back to a publisher who can then flow them to the author. That's something that we're really wrestling with. It's unbelievably difficult because our books, it's a feature, not a bug. They get onto all these different platforms, and then actually sort of accumulating a story that will help the author and help the publisher tell their story convincingly is really, really hard. But that's at least an incentive. For the publisher as well as the author. Now, your question about cost is a really tricky one, and also this is a sort of inside baseball one a bit. And there's a little bit of tension here between the idea of particularly an ethics of care being really, really important in the relationship between the publisher and the author. Like, it's a partnership, it's about developing the work together versus taking something that is essentially born ready and pumping it into a pipeline. So how you actually achieve that useful joint kind of developmental conversation, the process bit, without incurring too much cost that then gets passed on into the program has been a major topic of debate. So one of the things that the scholar-led publishers have made a strong case for is, or really opened up, is the question of the role of the acquiring editor. So the acquiring editor as a professionalized staff member in a university press is kind of expensive. And these are some of my, I love them, but they're some of my most expensive colleagues. So when we look at the cost of a book, that actually could be about 40% of the cost of producing a book. So how does one think about the acquiring editor? Can that person be a useful and important part of the ecosystem and a kind of an interlocutor? Or are they perhaps a little bit surplus to requirements? And I think it depends absolutely on the book and absolutely on the author. But do we want to ditch that? Do we want to not have that person in the mix? Is kind of a crucial question, because almost all our costs lie in labor. It really comes down to how you think about the value of that labor for reducing costs. I think nowadays we've got down to a level where probably on the production side, we're all pretty slim and pretty, and then kind of on the marketing distribution side, we're all pretty much equal. So it really has to be that labor up front that we have to talk about.
Yeah, I would add to that a lot of it is about data. We need more data. I mean, one of the things, if you're thinking about it from a publisher standpoint, when an author comes to them and says, we would like to publish our book open access, some of the first things that press will think about is, well, if we were to not publish it open access, how much of the investment could we expect to recoup without publishing open access? Or if we were to publish open access, how much of the sales income would we lose, and therefore do we need to recover? That's a complicated decision that gets made. And there's AAU Presses did a study recently about the impact of open access on print sales, but it's still, because it's still such a it's a new area where we don't have enough data to really show what the impact is, and we don't know how much that's going to change over the next few years. But so far, the impact on sales has not been, and Charles, I can't remember the number, but it's, you can expect a slight decrease in the sales, but you can still expect to make a good bit of revenue from the print sales, or from other digital sales. So it's a kind of a moving target, and presses. One of the things we need is for more presses to be publishing open access and that we're collecting data and seeing what the real impact is. And one of the things I'm finding and working with is that we work with, over 50 presses, and I'm seeing the number going down for what a press asks for in terms of being, if they're going to publish open access immediately upon publication. The Tome Initiative set the price at the book processing charge at $15,000, and I'm seeing now that number come down below 10,000. And not every press can do that, and it can be on a book by book basis. Some books they can expect to sell better than others, but we need data just to see how that is, how the numbers are evolving over time. And as presses get more comfortable with doing open access and seeing that they're not losing their shirts in the process, that we'll see even more experimentation.
I do want to add here, Maria, that you can also publish with an open access press where all the books are open access no matter what. But if you want to publish with a press where some of their list is open and you have to make a bid to be one of the authors on that part of the list, that can certainly be tricky, and it's a little bit unfortunate. At the same time, there's real economic considerations that you seem to be already aware of, right? Now, I have come to realize that the biggest cost in publishing, which has already been stated by Charles and Peter, is simply human labor. And you really can't cut that unless you're outsourcing to companies in India and that kind of thing. And so for me, the question is no longer, like, I have less overhead than most university presses, but that's only because I'm newer and I have a smaller staff, and it's structured differently than many university presses, and I have a lower output, right? If I publish 40 books a year and another university press publishes 300 books a year, just imagine the vast difference there in the amount of labor that's required to get that many more books out and supported with marketing and publicity and all the editing and everything else. But I want us to think about this a little bit differently. Why are we talking about university press publishing as if it's a commercial endeavor? It has become a commercial endeavor, forcing press directors to think like businessmen. Now, at the same time, it is a business no matter what. I mean, even if a press got all the money it needed to make every book open access granted to them by the provost, let's say, right? It doesn't eliminate the need to be good business people, right? You still got to know something about business and about economics and about, thriftiness and all those sorts of things. But something that really troubles me is that when we talk about what's possible in open access book publishing, why can't more university presses publish more open access books and all of that? It's because they're severely underfunded. It's because their administrations have abdicated their responsibility to promote the dissemination of research of their own faculty and other faculty. The other thing, too, that's weird about university presses, at some point in time over 100 years, it became uncool to publish with your own university's press, unless it's like Chicago or Harvard. It happens, but now all of a sudden, university presses are like serving the authors of all the other universities who also don't want to pay a dime for that service. So, sometimes I wonder, like, should universities collectively pool money to create a network of presses that can publish open access without worrying about where every dime is going or not going? I mean, I feel like sometimes we're looking at this problem from the wrong direction. If we say to press directors, given the current economic conditions and the lack of support from your institution, how do you actually make it? And Peter and Charles would have a lot to say about that. But it's just like we're taking something that's supposed to be public and we've oddly privatized it in a weird way. It's like very difficult for presses to be fully open access. And I fully understand that. I would not criticize them for that at this point in time, because, you know, I don't know. Why can't it be money in, books out? Money in, books out, with percentages built in every year for growth and for advancing staff who expect cost of living increases and all of that, right? You know, why is it always, this is what we have, how do we make this work? Oops, we don't have enough money for X, Y, and Z. You know, it's a very strange situation, in my opinion, that the entire university system in our country requires faculty to publish books which their tenure and promotion is dependent upon, but oops, we don't have any money for that, which is kind of like how the university does everything. The most prestigious book edition series in my field, medieval English text series, published within the library of the University of Rochester, okay, Hope Robbins Library, which is the medieval library, just found out this year that they've lost their NEH funding, which was $300,000 a year. And they called me yesterday to pick my brain about how they might recoup that money by other means. And the thing is, it's shocking, because what the hell is the University of Rochester doing? That book series has been diamond open access for over 20 years. Everyone in my field uses those texts in the classroom. They are essentially teaching texts, okay? And they've been doing this for over 20 years. Russell Peck, who's now dead, who was the director of the library before, created this series out of his own vision. And the University of Rochester isn't going to give it a dime, except for the one librarian who heads the project, who has a salary, but everybody else working on the series are grad students getting reduced. You see where I'm kind of going with this? You know, how could Rochester let something like this just fall off the table? Because they let lots of things like this fall off the table. So anyway, I'll shut up on that. This is a subject, you can probably tell, really keeps me up at night.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's understandable. Charles, thank you very much once again for putting that quote in the chat by Paul Courant. I think that's absolutely on point with what you were just saying, Eileen. And I am drawn, again, I think to go back to your phrase earlier about of feeling boundless optimism, though, I am oddly optimistic about maybe like a socialist approach to funding open access for university presses, or having everybody pool together. So it's maybe possibly one opportunity. I'm continuing to monitor the questions in the chat. Does anybody in the room have any questions as well, or comments?
Can I just
Charles?
raise, sorry, can I just raise one thing?
Please.
Something that we're seeing that's rather disturbing and interesting, I'd be interested for perceptions on this, is we're seeing more and more open access authors coming to us and saying, I don't want my book to be open access because I don't want it taken for AI training.
I was going to ask you about that. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm just curious how people are feeling about that particular one.
Really quickly on that, one of my authors suggested to me, because he's also a Bloomsbury author, and he got a letter from them, you know, we're going to make this deal with the AI companies. Do you want to opt in? Do you want to opt out? Blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't want to have anything to do with AI being anywhere near his work. And he said, why doesn't the Creative Commons licensing folk just come up with an icon, AI, red/, and we could slap that in the colophone along with the other and just say, this cannot be data mined. I have to tell you, though, I went through the OAPN library 2 weeks ago to see how many presses were appending the NC tag to their open books, which means, for those of you who don't know, non-commercial. It means you publish an open book, but if somebody wants to repackage it or translate it or do something with it, and they do it commercially, like for money, they can't without your permission, which is kind of nifty. So I'm asking myself how we can use the NC tag to maybe fend off, you know, AI mining, although all that mining has happened. Our overall downloads for 2023 were like 1.2 million, and then in 2024 they were 2.5 million. I don't think so. It's obviously AI bots. OAPN has told me that their system almost crashed multiple times last year due to AI bots coming in to get all the books. But that's all I'll say about that. I mean, I think that I don't really personally have a problem with AI bots mining the catalog of Punctum, but I don't think it should necessarily be for free. If Johns Hopkins University Press can sign a multi-million-dollar deal with AI companies for their authors' work, why can't open access publishers do the exact same thing? So long story short, I went through your open catalog. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the vast majority of presses, including Michigan, that have works deposited there do employ the NC tag, which surprised me because 10 or 12 years ago, people in the open access book publishing community really disparaged that. They were like, if the work isn't, BYO 0 or BY with no restrictions whatsoever, it isn't really open. I don't feel that way myself. I think there should be some protections around the work for the sake of the author and the press, while still also being open to read, share, redistribute, etc.
Right, but only for human beings. I mean,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So, yeah.
Here we
Yeah,
are,
not
there's a new slogan. Way for humans.
Oh, yeah. And again, Charles, thank you so much for including that link to the Authors Alliance about the the NC might be in the signal. Did you have a question?
I did. If there's time, I think some of what you've already said has touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering whether from the publisher's point of view, there's an elective affinity between certain kinds of scholarship and the open access format. Are there particular kinds of directions in scholarship that work that seem especially appealing in relation to thinking about open access publication, or is it a kind of neutral mode of publication in relation to the whole vast range of kinds of scholarship out there in your thinking and in your experience?
One thought I would have on that is certainly in the more creative areas, like when I talk to presses like Wesleyan and Pittsburgh that publish a lot of poetry, these are faculty, often the poets are faculty members at universities, but they are publishing poetry and they do not want their books to be open access for the most part. Because they still, in the poetry world, it's still much more you give poetry readings, people buy your books, not that they couldn't buy it if it was open access, but they want the royalties and they don't want anything necessarily impacting that. So I definitely find that as one area, but in terms of fields, maybe being more open to it, to open than others. I think what Eileen mentioned earlier about anthropology, I think my sense is that anthropologists tend to be pretty they share the mindset of the distribution, making it as widely available as possible, and they want the people who they are working with to have access to it. So I think those are some of the kinds of general observations I've made in recent years. I don't know if others have other thoughts.
I will share quickly. I can't remember his name, and this is terrible because he was so powerful for so long. The senior program officer at the Mellon Foundation wrote in. Everyone was scared of him, but he made a lot of people happy too. Don Waters, thank you. Don Waters is important, though, seriously, guys, because if you don't know who he is, he probably was the most influential person at Mellon funding the most important digital humanities projects and then digital publishing projects, right? Including Tome, which we've mentioned, and things like that. So he wrote an essay a couple of years ago talking about the fields. And then remember, this guy knows a lot about the history of DH and digital publishing. And he said the fields most influential within the humanities, and I knew this already, for open publishing were the classicist and the medievalist. Now, why is that? Well, because they work with really weird, difficult materials, multiple languages, multiple editions. And they work with holdings that are in libraries you can't get to very easily. Do you know what I mean? I was a Beowulf scholar. You wouldn't believe the hurdles I had to go through to see that manuscript. Do you know what I mean? I had to have letters of introduction from famous scholars. The whole thing was stupid, but I did it because it was my job as a medievalist. But yeah, the Pegasus Library, if you guys know about that, is the most incredible resource of classical texts from ancient Greece and Rome, etc., that was mainly designed as a teaching tool, right? So it was really classicists and medievalists who created some of the very first tools and platforms and software for making the texts of their fields available. And so that's kind of interesting, you know, when you think about it. And also the anthropologists and of course the scientists. But I'm sure, and then of course digital humanists. I mean, they've always been about open. I think they've been, although they publish a lot of closed access books, there's always a bit of weird irony, you know, when you see the type of scholarship someone does and then it's published closed access and you think, wait a minute, like a critique of the neoliberal university published with Routledge for $150. So, you know, you just go, what? But nevertheless, I mean, that's what I've seen in the last 20 years in terms of fields in the humanities. And with anthropology, it was also a reckoning. You know, you might ask yourselves, why was anthropology so into this? Why did they create a book series with Chicago and their own journal? It's all open access because they have a lot to apologize for. And they have spent the last 20 years doing some amazing soul searching. And someone asked me, Perseus Library, thank you, not Pegasus. Somebody asked me a couple weeks ago, what was the one field that was sending me the most interesting books? And without batting an eye, I said anthropology. Because not only are they publishing open, but they're doing some amazing work in that field. They're going kind of experimental. You know, they're trying out all sorts of different ways of doing the work they do, and they're interrogating themselves. Many of the books I've published in that field are almost like self-interrogations.
I very quickly, I'm just going to add that I think it's fields. So when you make an EPUB 3, which is a World Wide Web certified as a standard, it's a web internet standard, the EPUB 3 file. When you make it open access, you're making that work fully part of the network. And of course, this is the irony of our concern about the AI crawling, which is we designed these things to be machine readable. That was part of what we were doing. And now machines are reading them and we're bent out of shape about it, as I am, but we shouldn't be. But the point about that is it's his fields who really want to participate in the network for particular reasons. And my experience recently, we were hiring a papyrologist, so experts in ancient Greek papyri, totally like the Beowulf scholars. I mean, these people have collections that have colonialism has spread them around the world. They now need to piece them together from all these different parts. And they're like, of course, open access, which is funny because they're classicists in departments where classical historians are the most anti-open access people of anybody. So it's a weird, interesting thing. But I think that there's a common line around people who are really interested in digital objects and books as part of a network of digital objects, which of course is a good thing at GMU, as the Center for New Media demonstrates.
Yes, absolutely, and our libraries. Well, I need to channel my German ancestry for a moment and say that we are at time, but I also wanted to thank, again, Charles and Eileen and Peter. Thank you so, so much for this incredible conversation. And for everybody online, yes, everybody online, thank you, I think also for attending and for your insightful questions and thoughts, but really thank you again. This has been fantastic. And really
Thank you
appreciate
for
it.
inviting us. This was really fun.
Agreed.
Serious.
Oh, yeah. And we'll be sure to send you all the recording when it's ready.
Oh,
So
please do. Thank you.
Okay.
If I can just ask the panelists to hang on for 1 second, I'd like to try to get a photo. I know this is really goofy because we're in sort of a hybrid format here, but if you can just humor me for a second, what I will do is have our three, you three stand up next to them, and this way we can get a group photo.
You should come too. Emily, you want to take a picture?
We could do it.
You want our addresses to send checks to?
I'll send these by email. Okay.
I'm gonna shoot over.
You be on this
Okay.
side?
All right, yep.
All right.
Wait, oh, I'm doing it. Oh,
Yeah.
all right, all right.
You're gonna see the